So let us now talk about carbon-carbon bond formation. At this point in the course, we're getting quite close to be able to put together an organic synthesis. Now, the principles behind organic synthesis is that we control the reaction to gain some products that we want. Those products we would then have to isolate and purify, extracting from the reactant mixture, and then use those in further reactions to synthesize a new chemical. One of the most important things that we need to be able to do is have a mechanism for increasing the length of the carbon chain. This is where we go into that area of chemistry. To do it, we need to understand nitriles. Now, nitriles are iconic. You can see them quite straightforward. It's a carbon chain that has a carbon triple bond nitrogen at one end. Here's an example, butane nitrile. Now you might say, well, how is this different from a cyanide? Well, a cyanide is when we have R bonded to C, triple bonded to N, where R tends to be something else, like sodium, potassium, hydrogen. A nitrile is like that, but instead of R, that carbon is attached to a carbon chain. That's a nitrile. The skeletal formula kind of looks like some sort of lightning bolt with a fast-flying nitrogen at the end, but the structural formula you can see just there. Now, because the nitrogen has the lone pair, it has a dipole of a little tiny minus partial charge. The carbon has the positive partial charge. So it's moderately polar on because of that the dipole on the carbon-nitrogen triple bond, and as a hydrocarbon, it's higher than other comparable hydrocarbons, but lower than alcohols. It is also quite a good solvent in some cases. Now, a really important detail about all of these is all of these chemicals are not too far removed from some of the cyanide salts. Hydrogen cyanide, potassium cyanide, and sodium cyanide are all highly, highly toxic. So we have to be very careful when we actually use these. So how do we make a nitrile compound? Well, we need to react a cyanide with a haloalkane. And so here we have an example, 1-chloropropane and potassium cyanide. Now, potassium cyanide acts as an ionic compound with potassium as a positive halide ion, and the whole of the rest of it, the cyanide ion, carrying a negative charge. Together, the charges cancel out and it becomes an ionic compound. But in solution, these charges are free to separate from each other. As a result, when you mix it with chloropropane, what you get is a substitution, a replacement, in fact. That the negative cyanide ion undergoes a nucleophilic attack of the carbon in the chain that the chlorine is attached to, replacing the chlorine and kicking it out into solution. So we end up with potassium chloride dissolved in solution, and this new substance, this nitrile, butane nitrile. So you can see on the right-hand side, there's an electron diagram. You can see the cyanide ion is there at the top, with the two lone pair electrons on that carbon attacking the partial positive charge of that end carbon, and the bonding electrons being returned back to the chlorine. Now, have a look at what this has done. We started with a chloropropane. We've ended up with a butane nitrile. So this has effectively increased the length of the carbon chain by 1 carbon. That's a very useful thing to do in terms of organic synthesis. We don't have to do it with a haloalkane. We could also do it with an aldehyde or a ketone. For the carbon that is attached to the double bond oxygen is going to carry a partial positive charge that the cyanide ion is going to be attracted to. There's going to be a nucleophilic attack on that carbon. So you can see in the diagram on the right hand side what happens. It is attracted to that partial positive charge. The electrons in the double bond oxygen get returned to the oxygen, and so long as this is a suitably H plus environment, then what we'll find is we will gain H's on that single bond to the oxygen to form an OH group at the end. Now, this reaction here with hydrogen cyanide is very, very dangerous indeed. It's actually better, even though the example is not quite as obvious, to do this with sodium cyanide and sulfuric acid. So sodium cyanide doesn't quite have the same lethality as hydrogen and potassium cyanides. And in sulfuric acid, this is the source of the H+ ions that you're going to need to use to turn it into an alcohol, or the hydroxy group, at the very end of the process. So, who discovered nitriles? Well, it was these two chemists working together, Justus von Liebig of Liebig condenser fame and Friedrich Wohler. Now, I've not animated Friedrich Wohler. He suffered a facial disfigurement due to having smallpox as a child, and the animation didn't do him justice, so I've left it exactly how he is. They were studying compounds derived from cyanogen, and they were able to create this, or identify benzonitrile, which is a nitrile compound where the nitrile is attached to a benzene ring. Now, we'll talk about those in a short moment. Nitriles are found in nature. They're nature's deliberate poisons. They occur in things like apple pips, and the stones of certain fruits. The main reason is there is an evolutionary attempt to discourage creatures from eating the stones. If you are a creature that eats the stones and can dissolve the stones, there's enough cyanide in there to potentially kill you. Normally, what would happen with most animals is they'd eat the stones or the pips and they'd pass straight through, in which case they don't kill you. So if you're an animal that would physically digest the seeds and the pips, that's of no evolutionary benefit to the plant. You might as well die of cyanide poisoning. But if you're an animal that can eat them and pass them out with your waste somewhere else, you are of evolutionary benefit to the plant, and so get stuck in and get straight on with it. It's a natural poison to try to stop animals that are able to digest the seeds to stop eating the seeds. It's quite clever, really. Some millipedes, they use hydrogen cyanide. It gets produced from various glands around their body. So if something tries to eat them, then it tends to kill those birds or kill those animals that are trying to eat them. It's a defense mechanism. We use nitrile compounds all the time as a natural replacement of latex. Nitrile gloves are the kind of rubber gloves that you'll see in science labs, but all sorts of different applications. One of the perhaps ones you want to realise is those foam mats that you use for camping. They are a nitrile rubber. So once we've made a nitrile, by, say, reacting haloalkane with cyanide, we've got a longer carbon chain, but the problem is our carbon chain's now got a triple carbon-nitrogen bond at the end of it. One of the things that would be most useful is if we could get rid of this as well. And so what we do is we reduce it. We, with a nickel catalyst, we send H2 molecules in the H2 molecules on the nickel surface. They break down into hydrogen atoms, which then go and attack the nitrogen, and the electrons in the triple bond move and form bonding electrons with these hydrogen atoms. And so what we do is we break the triple bond and we end up with an NH2 group on the very end. And so now it's turned into an amine, which we, in the amine chapter, looked at how we could further synthesize things from that. If we don't want an amine, but we want a carboxylic acid instead, we can do that, but this requires a hydrolysis. One of the things that we could do is we could heat it with water and hydrochloric acid. When heated with water, the carbon-nitrogen triple bond will break, and in its place we will get a double bond oxygen and a single bond to oxygen. The proliferation of H+ ions will then finish off that single bond to the oxygen to form an OH group. Along the way, what we do is the hydrogens that are displaced from the water and also from the HCl will go and surround the nitrogen, forming an ammonium chloride ion. Well, not an ammonium chloride ion, but it will form an ammonium ion, which will, on evaporation, form ammonium chloride. If we wanted to form an additional carbon-carbon bond to basically attach more carbons to a benzene ring, then we need to look at the acylation and alkylation chapter when we first introduced those electrophilic substitution reactions of benzene, the Friedel-Crafts reactions, where we used a Lewis acid as a catalyst, and it produced the electrophilic ion that went and attacked the benzene ring, destabilized it, allowing the bonds to form and the substitution to occur. So I encourage you to go back and have a look at those two. So let's remind ourselves about Friedel-Crafts alkylation. This is where we're trying to add like a CH3 group onto our benzene ring. We do this with this thing called a Lewis acid catalyst, like aluminium chloride, AlCl3. When this gets near something like methyl chloride, what it does is it steals the chlorine. The Cl- ion comes off the alkyl halide, and we get AlCl4-, and then CH3+. It's an ion that is then attracted to the high electron density in the pi system of the benzene ring. It comes in, disrupts, an electron goes from the ring into bonding with CH3, and the hydrogen is jettisoned. The hydrogen then goes and steals back the chlorine from the Lewis acid, forming HCl. And that's how we would add the methyl group onto the benzene. Now, methyl benzene is otherwise known by the common name toluene. Now, exactly the same thing happens with acyl groups or anhydride groups. What could happen is the Lewis acid could steal the chlorine from like acyl chloride to become AlCl4-. That makes the remaining chemicals there, the rest of the acyl group, would be positively charged. It would be an electrophile attracted to the high electron density in the pi system, attack the pi system, take an electron from the pi system, hydrogen would be ejected, that hydrogen would go and form HCl. And so what we've added to our benzene ring in this example is an acyl group. But again, with both of these, we've formed a carbon-carbon bond. So we know how to form carbon-carbon bonds in aliphatic chemistry and aromatic chemistry. Is there any other ways we should be aware of? Yes, indeed there is. There's this thing called an organometallic way of doing things. Now, organometallic compounds look a little bit like this: methyl magnesium bromide. So they have a metal ion in there, they have a halide ion in there, and then they have a methyl group as well. And what happens is, to this, it forms a carbon ion, where basically when it is in solution, the Mg2+ and the Br- will leave in solution, leaving this carbon ion, the CH3-. Now this is going to go and attach two things and form a carbon-carbon bond. Let's have a little look at the mechanism of that reaction. First of all, let's talk about the creating a reagent that contains an organometallic compound. So what we need to do is we either need to react magnesium with an alkyl haloalkane or an aryl haloalkane, just like this here. So we've got bromoethane reacting with magnesium, and it forms this, the organometallic compound, just ready to go. Discovered by somebody called Dr Grignard, and so it's called a Grignard reagent. The Grignard reagent containing this thing, it's going to go in, and one of the things that it's going to do is it's going to go a nucleophilic attack on the carbon that is double bonded to the oxygen, and whether or not that is mid-chain one and it would be a ketone, or whether or not it's an end chain one and it would be an aldehyde. The only thing that changes is when we snip the double bond, leaving just a single bond to the oxygen, and then attach another CH3 group. If it's an aldehyde and the carbon double bond oxygen is on the very end, like this one here, this butanal, then what it's going to do is it's going to bond on that end carbon, which actually results in the carbon chain having the OH group on the second carbanion. It was still attached to the original carbon it was always attached to, but we've had an additional carbon add onto the chain. That makes this whole structure a secondary alcohol. If it's a ketone and the carbon double bond oxygen is somewhere mid-chain, then with the Grignard reagent, it's going to create a tertiary alcohol with the OH group right in the middle of the chain there. Now the key thing is it is a nucleophilic attack on the carbon, just as in the previous examples, and this is the third way in which we could increase the length of a carbon chain.